I hope so. Great. Great. Well, lovely to be here with you guys today. Well, at least virtually. I wish we could be all in person, but we all have to adapt to the current situation. Firstly, I'd like to thank National Geographic Learning, as always, for having me. I'm very happy to be here with you. And as you listen to these stories that I'm going to tell you, I ask you that you think about ways that you could incorporate some of these points and ideas for your students and maybe apply them into your classroom. So without further ado, let's begin. Take a look at these pictures. Isn't it strange to see pictures like this right now? It was only March of this year, but it feels like a lifetime ago. I was invited to do a talk for National Geographic Learning at a high school in Hermosillo, which is the capital of the Mexican state of Sonora. About 700 students attended, and after the talk, we hung out, we took selfies, and enjoyed a fun exchange with lots of curious questions about my work. Little did I know that this would be the last time that I'd share moments like these with so many people in one room, being close to each other, and in this way. A day later, I was getting on a plane to fly back home. And in the airport, I heard a woman on the loudspeaker talk about the closing of borders of neighboring Guatemala and Honduras. It was the first time that it really struck me that life was going to change in a very drastic way. 2020 has been a very challenging year for humanity for so many reasons. Of course, mostly with the COVID-19 pandemic infecting the entire planet. I personally live in Mexico City, which is one of the most populated cities in the world, a metropolis of over 21 million people. The pandemic has challenged societies around the world, but none more than in developing countries. Approximately 60% of registered Mexican citizens are informal workers. They earn only about what they can make in a day. These are vendors, street performers, service workers. If they don't make money that day, they may not be able to put food on the table that evening. And so the government felt that they needed to prioritize this economic issue rather than the health risks. For the month of February and March, when this was all beginning, businesses stayed fully open and Mexicans were generally not really wearing masks. People didn't seem to take the pandemic very seriously, probably due to much misinformation which was being spread on social media platforms. Now, watching international news daily and speaking with my family in Spain, I was much more alarmed. The media kept showing that the rate numbers were steadily rising, and so were the death tolls. So I seemed to be much more worried and concerned than most people around me, which was quite strange. Now, does anyone here know who this is by any chance? Anyone ever seen this picture or this character before? No? Well, the Mexican government put in place a campaign with a superhero named Susana Distancia. Translated literally in Spanish, Susan Distance, in English, excuse me. It's a clever wordplay as Susana in two words means Su Sana, which means your health. So her name is actually your healthy distance, basically. The idea was that if we should all stay about 1.5 meters away from each other, and that this was the safe distance to not contract the virus. I thought it was a quirky and fun idea, and I really hoped that people would catch on to it. Unfortunately, it didn't really seem to work. Mexico statistically being the country which least followed health guidelines for the pandemic in the first months. In my case, I was used to traveling for most of the work that I do, but because of the pandemic, all of my assignments and most of my public speaking dates were canceled for the foreseeable future. The first weeks, I stayed at home, puzzled and confused as to what was really going on. With so many uncertainties and contradictions that we were being told on a daily basis, it was pretty easy to feel worried and upset. And one of the ways that I stayed sane at home was by making personal photo projects. I began studying my environment and was making still lifes with plants and food, as you see here on the picture. I was also trying to photograph any exciting situation that was outside of the mundane at home. Like when my wife, she cut her hand while cooking. I asked her to not get rid of the blood as I wanted to document it. Thankfully, she's used to my wacky project ideas and she's a great sport about it. I guess you can say that I had too much time in my hands. However, it was also quite therapeutic to take a step back, slow down, and filter out all the noise. Now I'm curious, guys, what are some of the things that you've been doing to disconnect while you've been at home and to, keep sane? I'd love to hear some of your thoughts. A lot of greetings from the Maldives, from everywhere. Jairo was making videos at home and a lot of reading I see as well. Yep, I've also been reading a lot of books actually. Playing guitar, amazing. Cooking, yes, absolutely. Cooking and eating. I've been doing a lot of cooking and eating for sure. Making videos, a lot of dancing, great. Writing poems. Wow, a lot of interesting things. Well, for me, days turned into weeks. And the more time passed, I constantly read about the hardships that people were going through in my community. I began feeling more and more anxious and I really thought I should get out there and try to tell a story from right here in Mexico City. I decided to go out and document how the streets of Mexico seem to continue normal life without paying much attention to what the rest of the world defined as a great crisis. Now, I thought about how to go about it and decided to show city scenes from above. So by using my drone, I could get a bird-eye perspectives without putting myself and many other people into risk. As you can see here, although people were advised to stay home and stay within a certain distance, this pedestrian street was full of people walking around normally. I realized, though, that I'd have to get closer to really tell this story. So I went to a place called Bellazartes, which is a beautiful large park in the center of the city. Now, take a look at this picture. I took this photo on March 29th. And if you look closely, most people here aren't wearing any protection. They didn't also, as you can see, really mind standing right next to each other. Let's actually play Where's Waldo? Can you spot him? He's the only person in this whole group wearing a mask. I'll give you 10 seconds. Can you see him now? I've marked him here. Okay, I'll give you a close-up so you can really see him. He's really the only person out of 200 people wearing any protection in that group. These photos here were taken just a few days later. Mexicans are very affectionate people generally, especially with their partners. And it's something that I find very endearing. At first, though, I had a lot of internal conflict. I struggled not to judge the people around me, thinking that it was crazy that people weren't listening to the rules and taking precautions. However, it's always important to take a step back and reevaluate things. Now, I come from a very different culture, and not only that, I don't have the same life challenges that many people endure on a daily basis. The public health system here is underfunded and has a history of being unreliable. So it's completely understandable that there was a great deal of skepticism and misinformation. Now, even if I didn't agree, I kept telling myself, who was I to judge other people's decisions according to their beliefs and past experiences, right? It's important to point out that people's belief around death is unique to many other countries. Here in Mexico, a person's mortality is understood as a natural part of the process. Many of you may know that one of the biggest celebrations here is Dia de los Muertos, which is Day of the Dead. If you've seen the movie Coco, you will have heard of it. So people believe that if God chooses their time, that's it. It's not something you really try to alter or to change, and certainly not something that you should be afraid of. Now, religion and faith has had a big role in this, of course. And in this picture you see here, we can see where an evangelical religious group congregated in public to give each other support. They were preaching their beliefs to the public, that as long as they believed in their God, no virus could ever harm them. Now, while I was taking those photos, I noticed behind me these three men. They were dressed like Mexican cowboys and they had guns. Now, they were watching over my shoulder, kind of watching the scene unfold. I was very curious and I struck up a conversation with them. It turns out that they're a police force working in this park and in a place called Plaza Garibaldi for the safety of the community. For what community, I asked them. They said the mariachis, of course. It turns out that they were part of the charro, or the mariachi police. Now, most people in Mexico City that I know have never even heard of them. And I thought they looked so cool, right? Now, let's pull out a poll for a second. I'd love to know how many of you have heard of the mariachi musicians. Yeah, I don't know if you guys have heard of them, but, well, I'm going to tell you all about them in a second. But I'm very curious to know, have you ever heard of the mariachi? Donald Knight says no, never until now. I hope you guys are able to vote with the poll. There's a lot of yeses. There's some, of course. You have them in Colombia as well. Yep. All right. So 62% said that they have heard of them, and 38% no. Wow, okay. Great. Well, let me tell you a little bit about them. The mariachi are a globally recognized cultural icon whose music is representative of Mexico and its people. They've been around since the 1700s in the state of Jalisco in Mexico. But around 1930, they were introduced to the entire country of Mexico with the development of radio and television. And it was love at first sight. The music that they sing is heartfelt and emotional. They talk about passion, about love, and heartbreak. It expresses deep feelings, depicts everyday life, and honors Mexican history. Now, they remain beloved throughout the country regardless of age or class. You can say that it's truly the people's music. Mexicans usually hire mariachis for any social events such as weddings, baptisms, or birthdays. And ever since I moved to Mexico, I've been fascinated by their music, with their extravagant outfits, and how passionately this country connects with them. I come from Andalusia, which is in the south of Spain, and that's where flamenco music comes from. Now, although both genres sound very differently in melody, the emotions that they convey are very similar, and they really speak to me. There are a few mariachi songs that I still get goosebumps every single time I hear them. So I began going to Plaza Garibaldi, where the mariachi police do their patrols. Now, Garibaldi is a historically famous square where the mariachi have been playing for over 75 years. And normally, it's a place full of energy, where people from all walks of life come to socialize, to dance, to listen to live music. But now, the government had enacted new restrictions, recommending everyone to stay home due to COVID-19, and so the square was eerily empty. I have never seen it so quiet. The only people I would find was either an odd musician on his own, or surreal scenes like this one on the right, where men in protective suits were disinfecting surfaces using chemicals. And one day, I met Raimundo. He's a 74-year-old mariachi who's been playing in the square for over 50 years. Raimundo's family lives about 2 hours away from Mexico City. And he, like many other mariachi here, rents out a small room so he can sleep nearby. Once a month, he travels back to his hometown to bring back his earnings and spend a few days with his family. He then travels back to the square and does it all again. Raimundo's room is on the ground floor in an alley between two of the buildings in the square. And his room is about 8 feet long and 4 feet wide, very, very small. He has no kitchen, and he shares a toilet with the others in the building. Raimundo, he's literally seen it all. However, when we were talking, he told me quite emotionally that he had never lost as much work as when the pandemic hit. He was there alone since he didn't have anyone to play with. All of his band members had left to their hometowns and out of Mexico City. They were fearing for their safety and because they didn't earn enough money to survive. After listening to Raimundo's story, I decided to continue going back and document the situation for the mariachi during the pandemic. Now, remember earlier I mentioned to you that over 60% of the population are considered informal workers? Well, the mariachi make part of that group. They go out in the street every day trying to find clients to play their music to. They have no employer and receive little to no government support. So now, there were hundreds of jobless musicians vying for work. dozens of them waiting on the main avenue, almost stepping in front of traffic in hopes for a job. You can imagine that it's also not very possible to sing or play trumpet with a face mask on either. Here, we see mariachis that are talking to a couple through the window of a car. They're trying to convince them to be hired for a few serenades. So basically, the mariachi are forced to go out, risk their lives by putting themselves in situations where they may contract COVID-19. In fact, unfortunately, dozens of mariachi have lost their lives in the last months because of health complications due to the virus. Many of the mariachi are over 60 years old and have underlying conditions such as diabetes, which, by the way, affects more people here in Mexico than in any other country in the world. At a certain point, I was receiving almost daily messages from mariachis sending me photos and information about their colleagues having passed away. Sadly, one of the only jobs that they could still do and get during this pandemic has been working in funerals. Mariachis are sometimes hired by the family of the deceased to play and console those who have lost loved ones during these hard times. But these jobs were few and far between, as only a few cemeteries really offered this service. The closest cemetery where one could hire mariachis is about an hour away from my house. So I decided to go over there and talk to the manager. I told him I was going to do a story on the mariachi during the pandemic and asked him if he could speak to the families and ask for permission, and then to call me every time there would be a mariachi band playing in a funeral. Families usually hire the musicians only about 2 hours before the ceremony takes place. So I was literally on call, ready to go anytime one would happen. I'd only been to one funeral in a cemetery in my whole life. And in 2 weeks, I attended 5 funerals and photographed them. I gotta tell you, bearing witness to such a painful time for these families was super hard. It was really not easy. And I was very honored by their openness to share such an intimate moment and allow me to document it. As the time passed, people's savings were quickly running out. And even though the mariachi are considered to be an important part of this country's cultural heritage, and actually they're even considered World Heritage by UNESCO, they had pretty much been forgotten and left behind by the government. It's been a very hard pill to swallow for these proud musicians who worked so hard and never expected to be in this situation. But if there's one thing that I love about this country, is that Mexicans have a strong sense of community, and they really look out for each other during hard times. While many mariachi were struggling to make ends meet, local grassroots organizations made up of largely low-income community members mobilized, collecting food donations to create rations. Now take a look at the picture above. I really think that their faces say it all. It was clear that these musicians could never have pictured in a million years that they would be lining up like this to get a small piece of fruit, a bag of rice or pasta to feed their families. At the same time this was happening, a few other opportunities were starting to take shape. Mother's Day is a big deal in Mexico, and traditionally, the mariachi play a key part in the celebration. So this year, the biggest TV network decided to bring the serenades home. They contracted dozens of musicians who worked to work over 3 full days and played to the mothers of Mexico. The filming took place in a completely empty National Theater in downtown Mexico City. It was an impressive operation to coordinate so many musicians and keep the rules of Susana Distancia. While I was there documenting, I kept thinking of the people that were at home, seeing that one of their biggest traditions and celebrations through a television screen. Now, I'm pretty sure that watching the mariachis singing with masks on must have been a really big wake-up call for many people. Speaking of mothers, this is Monica, a single mother of 2 children and 3rd-generation mariachi musician. She lives with her 2 young sons, one of them which is a music student with a passion for the violin. Monica's mother is a caretaker for the elderly in need, and she also lives in a small apartment with them in Mexico City. While many people were questioning if the pandemic was a real thing, Monica's mother warned her from the start to stay home for the safety of the family. Now, Monica listened and stayed home for the first weeks. But when she saw that all of her colleagues were still going out to find work, and at the same time that her savings were running out, she decided that the possibility of some income was worth the risk. For all informal workers like her, it really came down to have to make the tough decision of whether to stay home and go hungry or go out and potentially be in harm's way. This portrait that I made of Monica really resonated with people and was chosen by Disturb for their Artists Against an Infodemic campaign. Disturb is a creative community which presents contemporary global issues in an innovative way. Completely independent from the restrictions of conventional news publishing channels, they use the most basic of social networks, the streets. So in this case, Monica's photo was used as urban art to send a clear message out into the world. If you're outside, wear a mask to cover your mouth and nose. I'll show you a little video that they put together and spread across their media channels.
Hi, my name is Rubén Salgado. I'm a photographer from Mexico City. The image that's been chosen is part of an ongoing project about the Mariachi community and how they're being affected by COVID-19. The Mariachi, they're an icon and symbol of Mexican culture, and they also represent 60% of the Mexican population, which are informal workers. Now, they are especially vulnerable to the COVID-19 pandemic because they have to go out on the street day to day to make ends meet. So staying at home is not really an option for many of them. Now, Monica, who we see in the photo, she usually stays at home these days, but when she does go out, she always wears a mask. So the message there is clear. If you're surrounded by people, always wear a mask.
So far, these pastings have been placed in the streets of Nairobi in Kenya, in Paris, and in the United States in Washington, California, and New York City. It was really motivating to see the work start to receive not only positive feedback, but to make some important social impact. And it really seemed like there should be a way to bring this even closer to home. Now, how many teachers would be interested in having an activity like this, where you can create dialogue with your students, and then go out and create an urban art project and paste these with your students? You think that would be fun? I'm kind of curious. Because some of these activities have actually been done in some schools in Paris, and they've been a great success. After 2 months working in Garibaldi, in the Mariachi Square, I met Andres, who's the young man on the left side with the green shirt. He's the son of Jaime, the mariachi singer in the center of the photo with his hand up. Andres is a world-class violin player himself, but his main passion is fighting for social justice. He and his friends have a nonprofit organization fighting for issues such as trans and gay rights in Mexico City. Seeing his father Jaime and his colleagues suffer so much during the pandemic, Andres' nonprofit decided to start an initiative called Salvemos al Mariachi, which means in Spanish, let's save the mariachi. Andres and a few others were making amateur videos as serenades to send to people. Now, I thought it was a great idea, but it lacked a bit of technical and storytelling expertise. I immediately thought that with my past experience, I could contribute and make the project have a wider impact. You see, before I was a photographer, I worked for 10 years doing 3D animation. I was the lead animator in Germany's biggest video game studio, making Hollywood-type productions with over 300 people. Crytek was the name of the studio, and they were leading at the time in virtual reality developments, so it's something that I have a lot of experience with. Actually, just last year, I began using some of these skills in my own documentary work. I was continuing my long-term project, Solar Portraits, which highlights the impact of solar-powered systems in different communities around the world. I'm sure you're aware of the Venezuelan crisis, where since 2014, more than 2.5 million people have left and fled the country in search for a better life. Now, these families, they leave everything behind. They walk for thousands of kilometers with barely any money in their pocket and maybe just a small bag with some clothes. That's it. Now, these are families with children and with elderly too. And they walk through the whole country of Colombia to get to Peru and to Ecuador. And many of them even walk at night. Here, we see a group of young men who have made the decision to walk through the night about 5 to 6 hours to get to the next shelter. Now, the way they use solar light is that they strap these lights to their chests and their backs because many people had been run over and hit by cars while they were walking at night. So with these lights, not only can they see, but they can be seen, which is actually even more important. Now, this photo might tell you that story, but in a world where we're so bombarded by imagery, it's really hard to engage with people to make them really stop and pay attention these days. For me, the challenge is to find innovative ways to get a message across and hopefully make the audience feel something. Now, using the skills from my past career, as I was mentioning, I created a 360 virtual reality film to take you in and try to show you what it must be like to risk your life walking for hours at night along extremely dangerous conditions. The user can move the camera around by looking around, so it really feels like you're there in first person. Take a look. I'm going to show you a little expert of it.
Ya sé. Pero vale, la lucecita alumbra, ¿eh? Mira, si te para una gandola de eso, pues ya me está quedando listo.
Now, making that film had been quite successful in creating interest and impact. So I thought that maybe if I apply the same techniques to collaborate with Andres' cause to help the mariachi community. My thought was, since nobody's supposed to leave the house or travel, how amazing would it be if we could teleport people directly to Garibaldi Square? If we could take them there and really feel like they're attending a personal live mariachi concert, all from the comfort and safety of their own home. I thought the idea might work, but I needed to find a way to get the resources needed to produce the project. Now, during the pandemic in late March, the National Geographic Society launched a COVID-19 emergency fund for journalists. And this grant was created to support journalists around the world who wish to cover COVID-19 within their communities. In this interactive map that you see here, you can see more than 100 grants that have been given out to projects worldwide. It's truly an amazing archive of work being created and ultimately will become an international traveling exhibition next year. I applied for the grant with the idea that we had put together and was really lucky enough to receive it. And thanks to that support, I could dedicate myself to this project, and we created a platform where people could order a real mariachi band and send dedicated and personalized songs as gifts to loved ones around the world. This was kind of like a crowdfunding site, you can say. So we created a pool of songs that people could choose from. And then people could pay and order anywhere from one song to a 30-minute concert. I then created a YouTube channel where I posted dozens and dozens of songs that people were ordering. Now, Mexicans living abroad and people from as far away as Croatia and South Korea made donations to send serenades to their families and friends. In a time when most of the world was in some sort of quarantine and people felt so far away from loved ones, this platform really brought a lot of happiness to people. Now, I created 360 videos as the gifts to create a much more immersive experience for the audience. I'm going to show you an example that I put together.
Esta bonita canción va dedicada para Juana de parte de su hija Asunción, con mucho cariño.
Para Sam, esperando que sus 30 le traigan lo mejor del mundo, de parte de Stephanie.
Para ti, March, de parte de Rachel.
Para Obdulia y Bernardo, de parte de Aurelien, y que vivan los novios.
Para Lola, de parte de Steve.
Felicidades de parte de Che. Claro que sí, claro que sí, claro que sí, claro que sí, claro que sí. Venga. ¿Sabes una cosa? Tengo algo que decirte y no sé cómo empezar a explicar lo que te quiero contar. ¿Sabes una cosa? No encuentro las palabras, ni verso, rima o prosa. Quizá con una rosa te lo pueda decir. ¿Sabes una cosa? No sé ni desde cuándo llegaste de repente. Mi corazón se puso a cantar. ¿Sabes una cosa? Te quiero, niña hermosa, y te entrego en esta rosa la vida que me pueda quedar. Doy gracias al cielo por haberte conocido, por haberte conocido. Doy gracias al cielo y le cuento a las estrellas lo bonito que sentí, lo bonito que sentí cuando te conocí. Doy gracias al cielo por haberte conocido, por haberte conocido. Gracias al cielo. Cosa. Tengo algo que decirte y no sé cómo empezar a explicar lo que te quiero contar. ¿Sabes una cosa? No encuentro las palabras, ni verso, rima o prosa. Quizá con una rosa te lo pueda decir. ¿Sabes una cosa? No sé ni desde cuándo llegaste de repente. Mi corazón se puso a cantar. ¿Sabes una cosa? Te quiero y te venero, te adoro y te deseo. Cariño, ven y déjate amar. Doy gracias al cielo por haberte conocido, por haberte conocido. Doy gracias al cielo y le cuento a las estrellas lo bonito que sentí, lo bonito que sentí cuando te conocí.
Sabes una cosa, que yo te quiero, que sin ti me muero, que estás lejos.
¿Sabes una cosa? Oye, ¿sabes una cosa? ¡Hey!
All right. Pretty fun, right? I hope you guys like that. Well, I also gifted a mariachi song to my family in Spain, who I didn't get to visit this year for the very first time in my life. As you can see here, my mariachi friends insisted that I sing along with them. But don't worry, I'm going to spare you that video. So at the same time that the platform was ongoing, I was working really hard to get this story published widely. I wanted it to be shown in as many places as possible so more people would hear about it and support the cause. It ended up being published in many magazines, including in Germany, in the UK, in Finland, Korea, as well as in National Geographic. And because of that, people from the different parts of the world learn about the story and order songs for loved ones. Now, for all of you who are living in Mexico, have you ever looked at this month's Vogue magazine, the issue of November of Vogue? Well, last week I called Monica and I told her to, Monica being our female mother who we spoke about before, right? The mariachi. So I called her and told her to buy the November issue of Vogue magazine. And I mentioned to her that there was a short story about the mariachis in it. She called me back almost crying when she saw her picture spread on a whole page in Vogue. She had never dreamed that her face would appear in a magazine like that. Women who look like her are still so underrepresented today. And here, she was representing the mariachi culture and Mexican women, appearing as a symbol of resilience and dignity. Now, she's deservedly so proud, and it's been yet another part of this project that is given back to me. Mexico's people are humble and hardworking, generous and optimistic. And these core values are what have guided people like the mariachi through these hard times, and have also helped them to navigate the pandemic in North America's largest city. As a Spanish-born, American-raised person living in Mexico, watching the pandemic unfold has been full of lessons for me. You see, in Europe, we depend on government systems to take care of us for our basic needs. But here, people have to take decisions and take things onto themselves within their community. This initiative was one of them, and it was made at the right time, when what we needed the most was to connect to people that we love. And that's exactly what the mariachi can give us: joy through their music while sending heartfelt messages to the people who we care about the most. It was a lot of fun to be a part of as well. But most importantly, all of the money that was raised was used to support over 400 mariachis and their families. Now, these are proud, hardworking folks that do not want to be given handouts. So with this project, we were able to facilitate for the musicians to continue working in a dignified way. I feel very grateful that they've allowed me into their lives, and together we could create something to bring real social impact. I've learned so much from their will to overcome the obstacles that life throws at them. Over the last couple of years, I've tried to make social justice initiatives an integrated part of my work. And through it, I really believe that my photography has become richer because of the connection that my subjects and I create together. I really believe that any effort can be made so much stronger by working together, finding commonality across divides, and importantly, supporting the most vulnerable members of our community. I'm a firm believer that we're only as strong as the least fortunate among us. It's a powerful lesson in empathy and global citizenship, one that we need direly at this moment in history, and one that can and should begin early. So I encourage you all to bring this into your classrooms. Challenge your students to reach out a hand, to connect to the world around them, and to especially make an effort to positively impact the life of someone within or out of their community. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rubén. Thanks, everyone. It was wonderful. I'm just reading responses in the chat box right now. We do have a little bit of time for questions. If anyone has them, please feel free to shoot them into the Q&A box and we can ask your questions to Rubén. Thank you so much for letting us know this amazing story. And I think at the end, you really hit at the point about why it's important for teachers to share with their students things like this about, like we said, building community, global citizenship, these lessons. Thank you. I'm just reading a lot of thanks in here.
I see that. Thank you all for joining and listening. I appreciate that.
Great. And I'm not sure if you all have seen it, but just so you know, Rubén does have, you did a voices video with us a little bit ago. I'm gonna put the link in the chat box if anyone's interested in seeing a little bit more from Rubén. 1 second, and your work is featured in several National Geographic learning programs as well. I'm just gonna put this in here.
Great.
I see some questions about the certificate. I can take those. Rita says you have a big heart and a modern approach to life. That's great.
Thank you, Rita.
Oh, I see Karima put a comment there. I wonder if we could write articles to send for Vogue. That could be a interesting classroom activity.
Well, I mean, Vogue, it honestly is very different in each country. And I'm not sure what country you're in, but if they have a local Vogue, it shouldn't be too difficult to find out the email address to their editor-in-chief. And it never hurts to give it a shot and send out an email with a project idea that you may have with your students. And who knows, you might get lucky and it might be something that really resonates with them.
Yeah. I just want to pull out Mark's comment here. I feel very moved by your intention. This is an example that the greatest language we can teach our students is not English, but the language of kindness. I think that's really a nice one to end on. I do see one question here from Jairo in the chat box. Ruben, I wanted to ask you, how do you approach the people? I mean, were they open to posing for the photos and talking to you?
So the mariachi musicians generally, they're so used to being photographed when they're on stage or when they're playing. However, in this case, I was trying to tell their story in a very vulnerable moment. So it was actually quite difficult to get inside of the community, to make them understand that I was not going there to take photos, to in some way victimize their situation, but to really, that I was really truly interested in telling their story in a real way, and at the same time to trying to create some kind of positive impact and support them in any way. So it took a while of me going every day to the square and making friends slowly until people realized that I wasn't just coming there for 2 days, taking photos and going away, but that I actually also was living there. In fact, that square is only 10 minutes away from my home. So, you know, they're my neighbors at the end of the day. And, you know, it's being foreigner, at first people can, you know, they were a little bit shy and taken aback because they're very protective of their identity and of their story. They're not proud of the situation that they've been going through. So it did take quite a little bit of effort, but once I made some friends, then, you know, things went more smoothly.
Yep, true for a lot of things in life there. Did see another question from Dexter. What are some success stories you have with the mariachi people that you've seen during the last 9 months of the pandemic?
Success stories. Well, quite a lot, actually. I mean, many people have obviously gotten sick, and many families of mariachi have gotten sick, and there's been situations in which mariachi have been able to rally together and play in special events, so that even though they were virtual events, but that they were able to gain some kind of income so that they could really support their families who needed private hospitalization. Because as I was mentioning earlier, unfortunately, the public system is not always working so well. And so, I mean, it's been really, really tough, I have to say. But I mean, success stories, people's perseverance and their strength to just keep going and not giving up and realizing that, you know, this will be over at some point. And, you know, I really have the feeling that what everyone used to always say to me was like, you know, we're used to worse things. Mexicans have endured very difficult times in the past. So for them, yes, this is very tough, but it's not the toughest that they've experienced. And they have a really strong will to keep going.
That's a great point. All right. A few people are asking if there's anything they can do to contribute. See, Mark just put a question in about that to the cause. That's
a good question. This portal, this is not really working anymore because I actually left Mexico City for a few months to travel to a less, let's say, dangerous place with my family, with my mother as well. And so I have not been running that portal anymore, but there are definitely NGOs and nonprofit organizations in Mexico City, which would be very easy to Google, who are supporting the mariachi, for example, or any other informal workers. And I'm sure that any donation to informal workers' causes would be very, very helpful at this point.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Ruben. I feel like this is a good time to wrap up. So I just want to give a huge thank you to you. And then for everyone here, I do have just a few last minute notes, but Ruben, if there's anything you want to say before we close out, feel free.
No, just thank you guys for listening. If you want to follow my work, my Instagram is up on the screen, and I hope to see you and hopefully meet you in person one day when this is all over.
I can't wait for that time. It's going to be great.
Same.
Wonderful.
Take care, everyone.
Just a few notes, everyone, before we log off. I want to let you know, I see questions about the certificate. We will be getting a certificate to you. We'll also have a recording of the session that will be posted on our site, and we'll send a PDF of the slides over. That all should get to you within 5 business days. But you can always contact us if you have any questions at all. We do have a second session of the same webinar later on today. It's at 4 p.m. Eastern time. So we'd let any of your colleagues know if they'd love to join us, your family, friends. It's a really open session. Like many people mentioned, it's different than other webinars we've done before because we think it's important. I think there's lessons that we can all take for our own lives as well as your lives as teachers too. So we hope you've enjoyed it. We do have a feedback survey I'm going to direct you all to now. I'd love to hear what you thought of the session. Please let us know any feedback. And just a huge thank you for being part of the community. We're so glad to have you here as part of the National Geographic Learning community. And we hope you see you at a webinar again soon. We do have one coming up in about 2 weeks that looks at pivoting from the institutional perspective, going back from online teaching to in person. So hope you join us for that one. But thank you all for being here. I'm going to direct you all to the feedback survey now. Hope you have a great rest of your afternoon, morning, evening, wherever it is in the world. We truly had a global audience on this session. So glad you could spend an hour with us. All right, everyone. I hope you have a great rest of your day. I'm going to sign off now. And thanks again to Ruben.